I didn't mean to hijack. Since we had a little dead air, I wanted to talk about something.
How dare you? How dare you do that? Kay,
Look at
Gabe,
all of my
welcome.
favorite beautiful people. Look at
Hey,
them all
y'all.
in one space at the same time. How's everyone doing? Can everyone hear me? Is this thing
Yeah,
on?
we can hear you. We can
Oh,
hear you.
all
Yeah,
right,
we're
all right,
doing
all right.
fine. We're just ignoring you.
That's okay. That's all right. I call that Wednesday, also known as days that end in Y.
Right?
Days that end
I just
in
love
That's
Y.
my
your.
life.
I just love your. I love your silky smooth stylings of your voice. So I'm just in awe, just listening.
Oh, too much. It's too much. That's what I'm here for. I'm here for the compliments, and I appreciate it.
Smooth jazz all the time.
Smooth jazz.
That's right. The
Smooth
quiet
jazz,
storm.
yes.
The quiet storm. That's
You
Gabe.
Hi,
know
Violet.
the quiet storm. I listen
Oh
to the
yeah.
quiet
Oh
storm.
yeah.
I think in another life, Gabe should have been like on late night radio.
I mean, look, I've got a
Kinda
face for it. I've got the face for it. I've got the face for it. I've got the face for it. It's
Hey,
good
Violet,
to
how are
see
you?
several of you.
Doing good. We're live. You know that, right?
Oh, we're live. Yeah,
All
we're
right.
just waiting for people to roll in.
Yeah.
We're chit chatting.
I think Violet suggested we should be talking about substantive things like,
Or
I
maybe
guess
she
it's-
suggested we
Say it, didn't I?
shouldn't
The
be
world
talking
of-
about smooth jazz.
Isn't the world of privacy on fire right now? Why is everyone so concerned with smooth jazz?
Well, so we'll go ahead and get started here for everybody tuning in. Thank you so much. Again, this is such a pleasure to have so many amazing people in one virtual room. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your day from all the awesome privacy things that you do to each of you. Those of you who aren't familiar with anyone in this panel, do yourself a favor and find them on LinkedIn and follow them. I'm pretty sure most people tuning in would know who you are, but just in case. So thank you for everyone tuning in. We're celebrating Data Privacy Week, and this is the Privacy First Awards, the first edition. It's going to be an annual thing, so congratulations to everybody that's here. We're really honored to have you. And if you want to see more about every individual person on here, there's a link for that. We'll share that in the comments. But again, let's go ahead and jump in because we have so many people and not enough time. Even though this will probably go over the hour, we're going to have so much fun either way. But let's go ahead and dive in. I did a panel, or not a panel, I'm sorry. I did a poll on what listeners wanted to hear from you individuals around privacy. One of the first things, or one of the biggest voted on, if I can find it, was around generative AI governance. Of course, that's a very big topic right now. But before we get into that, let's talk about the privacy enhancing computation techniques. That seems to be the most popular thing right now that people want to hear about. So I want to go around the room and just get your take, if anyone wants to just chime in on that topic, and then I have some questions we can kind of dive in. But floor is anyone's.
If I could ask, as you take the floor to answer, a very quick introduction, just name and organization you're with, and maybe one relative thing for those.
Yeah, let's do that. Good call.
Yeah.
So we'll start with my first on the screen, Nishant, if you want to go ahead and tell the people who you are.
Hi, my name is Nishant Bajaria. I run privacy security engineering programs at a few companies in the Valley. And I've written a book on the topic, and I'm going to write a second one that's in the works right now on generative AI and privacy. So that's me. Thank you, Kate.
Debbie?
Well, hi, I'm Debbie Reynolds. They call me the Data Diva. I intersect at emerging technology and data privacy.
Jeff?
Hey, Jeff Jokish. I'm a data privacy researcher. I'm with Avantis Privacy, and I sort of work at the intersection of data privacy and data science.
Kay?
Hi, y'all. I'm Kay Royal. I'm a nurse turned an attorney. I'm Chief Privacy Officer at Crawford & Company. I co-host the Serious Privacy podcast, and I'm known for actually being very blunt and outspoken and practical about all these complex privacy topics. We'll just put it out there.
That's her. There it is.
I love it.
I think that means you get to go first in answering the question, then this topic that the users chose.
Let's go with what
I
we
think
got.
it's next introductions.
We get. We got
Oh,
one
I'm
more though
sorry.
with Violet.
I'm awful. Violet, I am.
That's okay. Don't
No,
worry.
it's not
We all
okay.
know- We all know each other.
It is literally not
I
okay.
actually want to just echo. I loved hearing Kay's voice. Thanks, y'all, because I'm also Southern, and Kay and I have bonded over the years. But
Yes.
I'm on the, and I also like how Debbie said it. You know, I'm straddling on the risk management and data privacy side, like she mentioned, straddling her different area. I work for an insurance company, Crum & Forrester, and I also kind of straddle the cybersecurity and privacy. And what I love about this group is we all somehow are connected with each other in different ways, and we all respect each other. So you pulled together a good group of privacy people.
Awesome. Well, to that, Gabe, what you were saying about Kay, if you want to hit it off, the floor is yours.
I am
Let's hear
probably
it.
the least technical of all people on this. So I would say it depends on what people are asking about the privacy enhancing computational technologies out there, because they're a mathematical way of ensuring that when people are collaborating together, that their privacy is still maintained. It's not a technology that is at the height of its ability. It is essentially, I would say it's still an emerging technology, although it's an established technology. But it's not an easy one for companies to be able to integrate, although you're seeing many more parties starting to enter the field there. But I would say that that's still a topic that a lot of people in privacy really haven't had to broach in their day jobs. Is something that maybe is an interest they've paid attention to, but they're not really looking at vendors for it in most privacy programs, to my knowledge, and the conversations that I've had. But it's something they're going, that would be really cool to have, but why?
Mm.
And I'm seeing
Anybody
nods,
else
but
have-
I'm seeing the technical people's faces going, I don't know about this, Kay.
No. It's the but why, I think, is the natural next question, right?
Yeah.
But why? But maybe why not?
Right? Why isn't it
not is
already
the-
there?
the
Why
inverse
isn't it
question.
applied to everything? Yeah.
So I've got a take on this. I think it's a awesome technology. Maybe not quite yet there, not because the algorithms aren't there, but because we need a lot of computational power in order to implement it when you're doing this in use.
A lot of
there's plenty
overhead.
of ability to. Yeah, exactly right. I mean, you can encrypt data that's in transit or at rest, right? But when you're actually working with the data at the same time, right, it's hard to do. Have encrypted data all the time when it's actually in use. But while I love the technology, I think my sort of concern is that it's not necessarily just protecting the data inside your organization, which this sort of privacy enhancing tech can do really, really well with the right computational force behind it. But then the sharing of the data to somebody else, right, is still a bit of a problem, right? Even if you encrypt it, send it to somebody else, right? That technology doesn't solve the sharing problem, which is my concern.
The sharing problem.
Good point.
Is that a human problem?
Yeah, well, I think it's actually a very interesting distinction, the sharing problem versus the usage problem, because sharing is a form of usage, but it is a form of secondary usage, where some of the leaders in privacy enhancing technologies today, PETs, as all of you privacy nerds call them. See how I did that? Like, you guys are the nerds, not me. But PETs, like, I feel like a lot of the world is leaning towards like homomorphic encryption as being part of the answer. But Jeff makes a great point. Homomorphic encryption is great if you're looking at this as a graph problem. It's great right to that first connection of data, but any subsequent connections of data, I mean, are you able to extend homomorphic encryption through sharing versus just direct use? I don't have a good answer to
My
that.
mind goes to the exceptions all the time too. When you
Yeah.
think about the exceptions to the rules, or how many times that you personally have asked, like I've asked, hey, I know Gmail's not allowed on my work computer. Can you please make the exception? And so when you think about the sharing piece, it's just like, you've got to think about those exceptions around how people get around what you just put in place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think when, I'm a technologist, I say I love technology, but I don't love what people do, everything that people do with technology. Part of this really is data. To me, it's a data problem. So it's not just, uh, I think a lot of companies, they want an easy button, right? So they look at privacy enhancing tech as like the savior. So it's like, okay, we have horrible data practices, but we're going to wrap privacy enhancing tech around that. And it just doesn't work that way. So a lot of it is having better governance and asking that why question. Like, why are we collecting this? Like, why is this important? What is the trajectory of the data? What is the end of life strategy? So companies are very good at collecting data. They're not great at that end of life. And so that's where they get into a lot of trouble. And then those secondary uses, and a lot of that is because stuff that hangs around too long, or people just lose the plot, say it. So when the data is collected for one purpose, it may, because of governance issues within the organization, it gets forgotten in terms of, why do we have it? How should we use it? What are kind of the legal ramifications of that? What are the data ramifications, right? So there's like a huge tech debt within companies that they need to really deal with, that makes it harder for them to do this. Maybe it's easier on new data, but they still have some legacy data, or legacy, not even data, legacy bad habits, I would say, that have to be sorted out as well.
Legacy bad habits.
Legacy processes.
Legacy
That's probably the
process.
technical term I would give.
Yeah. Are they as in the let's collectively call privacy engineering and privacy governance, are they learning bad things from the security side of the world though? Because what you just described, Debbie, is exactly the problem for over 2.5 decades that I've seen in my very intimate part of the security industry, which is we continue to try and wrap technology solutions around very real human process problems.
Right. And from a cybersecurity perspective, I love to hear some cybersecurity people chime in, but cybersecurity is like, you got to protect everything regardless of why you have it, right? And privacy is a lot about the why. And so what happens with data has a lot in privacy, has a lot to do with the why and what. Where cyber is more about, let's just protect everything. Nothing wrong with that, right? But there are reasons and there are rights that travel with the data, or should travel with the data. And I think from a operational standpoint, you know, a good example is deletion. So Nishan talks about this a lot. He talks about this on our podcast together, and he talks a lot about this in his book. It's very good, around the complication of deletion. People think you just press a button and bam, everything is gone. And that's just not the way it is, right? Data is all over. Data has arms and legs and tentacles, and different uses. It gets changed and moved around with the organization. So I think part of the privacy challenge that companies have will really be that data lineage and tracking data throughout the enterprise, and making sure that the rights and the uses for that data don't somehow get separated from the data itself. So I think that's the next challenge.
I think that so I'm on the cybersecurity side too, and I agree with you. Zero trust concept as a cybersecurity professional sounds awesome for our purposes, but when you present that to executives, they're like, "Well, why don't you trust our employees? Like, what's wrong?" And so I
for
kind
the
of
same reason you gave them background checks before you hire them. I thought, like,
that's a great point. I've never pointed back to the HR hiring practice.
Yeah.
But what I love to compare in this is I have always thought, and my origins come in privacy, but I always feel like we are the purple-haired optimist of the industry. Like we think everyone's going to play by the rules, and we want everyone to play by the rules, and we think there's going to be a national privacy law coming in for 10 years running or 12 years running. But the security people, I feel like, are much more practical. And I think what we can learn from them, to Debbie's point, is, and probably pessimistic practical as well, is if you're going to have an underlying technical control, which we can call the privacy enhancing technology, right, in this similarity, you need to have an administrative control that overlaps with it. So there's consequences for going around the rules. So just like you have access controls that say, you're not supposed to touch things you don't need to be working on. You don't get into the HR materials. There's also a technical control that limits access. So there's a rule and a technology, and those overlap. And I think that that's what privacy hasn't figured out, is how
Policy
to
plus enforcement.
overlap.
Nishant.
So I'll jump in. I think one of the challenges, and it's been true for the last 10 plus years I've been in this domain, I think one reason why the legal policy pitch about the first principles, do the right thing, falls flat beyond a certain point is it works very well when you have a GDPR type storm. And then what happens is privacy professionals on the engineering side and the legal side, I think, overplay their hand. Everything's an urgency. Everything has to be fixed right now. And there is a feeling of drip, 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 where the engineering bandwidth is slowly sucked up by privacy to the point where privacy becomes a dirty word. And then people do just enough to stay on the right side of compliance. And I'd like to give this reminder that when Target was breached 10 plus years ago, they were PCI compliant. Of course, the PCI organization retroactively withdrew the certification. Story for a different day. But there's a pattern of failure as to how this actually happens. So I think one way to sort of think about this very simply is, what are we trying to prevent? Are we trying to prevent somebody from getting de-identified, incorrect profiling, mismatched cohorts, data exfiltration? What actual visible harm are you trying to prevent? Working backwards from that and then building trends. Yes, Kate?
No.
I think that would be a great conversation start, right? The second, boy, I don't piss people off that badly usually in the first 10 minutes of me talking. Yeah.
Good timing.
The second thing I would say is, you would not drive a car, to build on what Violet said, you would not drive a car without a seatbelt. You would not buy a house without an inspection, right? But the challenge is, you can make the same argument about privacy as well. Like, why should you ship something without privacy? My question to that is, why not make it like a seatbelt? Why not make privacy a product? Deletion is an API, that's a product. If you share on Slack somebody's SSN, let that be blurred right after its time. So make sure that privacy and security tools work in the background continuously. Use them not just to prevent, but to train as well. So my general sense is, make privacy as pragmatic and practical as possible. If you don't do that, all you have is a bunch of slogans during this week, and then everything goes back to normal. I've run 5 programs, and thankfully, at least as of right now, there has not been a single incident on my watch. So I try to sound very cutthroat and pragmatic because this approach works. Because it's not just privacy, it's security, physical safety, misinformation, sexual harassment. Your bosses have to prevent a whole lot of harms. Why is privacy automatically more important, right? So let's make it pragmatic.
Can I pull a few things together, and then anyone on the panel can answer, or someone else out there? You used an analogy that I thought was perfect. You wouldn't drive a car without a seatbelt analogy. I used it earlier this week because I got one of the classic, well, why is good enough not good enough answers to an encryption question. And of course, the answer is for the same reason why, Volvo has a 3-point seatbelt, right? Like, it also has a roll cage with 3, because good enough's not good enough. But as you built those programs and you didn't have any of those issues, and let's go back to Target, again, your same example, they were also breached via a third party accessing them, right? Like a car on the road, your choice to not wear a seatbelt might not kill you, but someone else choosing to drive drunk might. So how do you, as one organization dealing with others as third parties, avoid those collisions on the road? Even if you're doing all the things, you're being a good defensive privacy driver, you got your seatbelt on, but you have partners that you have to work with. Those people are the same reckless folks on the road. What do?
Is this where I jump in and say you can't fix stupid?
Yeah, you can't control other people, I feel. So to me, a lot of times when people talk about Target, this is a breach I know a lot about. People talk a lot about it, right? And the talking point is always like, oh, this is like, why third parties are bad, right? So third parties aren't going any away. But my issue was, once they broke in, how could they do so much damage, right? So to me, that tells me something about the organization internally. So if going back to zero trust, right? So, well, okay, so let's say someone broke in. Like, what can they do once they break in? So I think we need to move away from this castle analogy, where I feel like cybersecurity a lot of times have thought about security like, let's make bigger walls and thicker walls and put a moat around the castle, right? So the threat is in the castle already. So if that's the way you're thinking, or there's a drone flying over a castle, if you're thinking about security in that way, you're not really thinking about what the real threats are to your organization.
Mm-hmm.
Or as I hear
think
some
our
people
metaphors
describe
are-
it as chocolate. It's got the hard candy shell on the outside and the soft mushy shell on the inside. Same thing as the
I just-
castle analogy. We have chocolate defenses.
Now I'm hungry, and I also
I thought I was the
pictured.
only chocolate defense anyone needed, but I guess that's
It
up for
depends
debate
on what
also.
that soft gooey inside is, Gabe. I mean, if it's a cherry center, I don't
Nougat.
want it. But
Nougat.
as long as I break through that hard
Nougat.
candy shell to find out, then it's good. Depends on what gold's in there to get.
All true. All true.
Well, Debbie talked about provenance, right, and lineage, and somebody was talking about access controls, right? I think our problem in its base form is that data is just sitting out there floating around, right? And it doesn't have these things connected to it, right? There's no access controls. There's no security built in. There's no data lineage connected to it. All these other metadata points or feature functionality is not connected directly to the data, right? We're still working with CSV files, right? And databases that frankly suck, right? I mean, we're never going to be able to control data, personal data, if we're using these kinds of technologies. Will not work. Can't work.
I mean, what you're dooming us for a life of failure then, because spreadsheets are literally not going away. But there are more billion-dollar businesses run on spreadsheets than there are Salesforce.
I know.
That's,
I use them.
there you go. That problem's not leaving us anytime soon.
But you know,
Interesting. And-
technology comes
go
up
ahead.
with a way of tracking people. We can't seem to stop technology from tracking people. Why can't we turn around and apply the same technological expertise to data lineage? So this goes back to what you were
What if
saying
I
earlier,
made an-
Gabe. Why yes, why? Ask why not.
No, go ahead, Nishant.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the problem from my perspective begins with how the tech stack was formed. You have companies acquiring other companies. You have new services getting spun up to drive engagement towards a particular short-term metric. And eventually, it's like the extra 10 pounds that won't leave after the holiday season's over. All of these things get entrenched. It's like a government program. Once you start, it never ends. So you have all of these tactical services built together in a very disconnected fashion. Eventually, they get spun together. Data gets shared. So you have a system that is not built by intention. It's built by commission and omission, right? And then you have data being moved back and forth. You have no way to measure risk. You have no way to track the data. So all of these issues start with the point of not having coverage, not having visibility. It's like Don Rumsfeld's unknown unknown from 2 decades ago. I think that's why it's hard, because if you look at the last 10, 15 years, look at data protection as a whole, that's security and privacy both. So many laws, so many panels, so many debates. Does anybody really feel safer or better? I mean, most companies' tech stacks are like a Boeing plane. Too many loose boats. Hopefully, no Boeing employees here, but yeah.
Yeah, we can extend that analogy a lot. So,
Going
Might
back
be
to
too
people that
soon to
fly
say,
on
and no
Boeing
doors
planes.
falling off. Go ahead.
I was going to say, forget employees, just people that use their planes every single week, Nishant. It's worse than being an employee.
So on this, before we move on to the next topic, which is going to be AI, I'm surprised that Jeff didn't mention this, but didn't you post something recently about training problems? I mean, doesn't this kind of fall into that same category of training issues?
Yeah. I mean, the privacy and security folks, I forget what organization it was, did a survey that essentially said that most organizations, their cybersecurity folks, don't think that the employees are trained well enough to actually implement these kinds of policies. And that's pretty scary, right?
Does that fall back down to the human problem that, kind of like what Kay said, you can't fix stupid? But I think it's applying, like the company actually being intentional about it.
I think and I think I answered you in your post, Jeff. I think organizations have not traditionally put a huge premium on training. So training is expensive, right? It's time consuming. Someone has to do it. It may not have an immediate ROI or immediate bottom line impact. But I was really interested to see there was a article about Microsoft actually around them moving from being a know-it-all organization to a learn-it-all organization. Actually, the CEO of Microsoft, he was a trainer before he was, everything else he was in the organization. So I think, we have to move away from this traditional idea that somehow, I'm going to save money from training by going out and get someone who already knows this or whatever. So organizations, as the compute becomes more complex, the data challenges become greater. There has to be companies that will win in the future will understand why training is important, and they'll do it. And the ones who don't just can't really get to where you want to go without that.
If I said yes to training, but no to the training method, look, I'm the furthest thing from a car guy. So far from a car guy that I didn't get a driver's license until I was in my early 30s because I bought a house and I was like, oh shit, I guess I have to be able to get to that thing, don't I? So far from a car guy, right? But that analogy, car analogies work really well. We train humans in their mid-teens to late teens to drive automobiles. And then we don't really ever retrain them ever again on that. And we just assume that they will safely get on these roads forever. And for the most part, it works. So it can't all be training. We've watched the evolution of cars with backup cameras and lane change assist. A lot of technology that was originally invented not for drivers below the ages of 75 north of the state of Florida or Georgia, but nonetheless, those features have helped all of us. I feel like it's not just training that's the problem here, right? If that were the case, there'd be a lot more car accidents on the road.
There are a lot of car accidents on the road. I would
That's
say
fair.
it's
That's fair.
Experience, exactly. Okay, that's what my brain went to.
Experience. Okay.
I would say my husband says I'm the worst driver in the whole world, and I need to go back to driving school. It's because I'm okay being a passenger of life and sitting in the passenger seat, and I would rather not, like you, I'd just rather not drive. But if I am behind the wheel, I am daily testing that awareness. I'm daily testing those applications that I learned at 16.
Yeah.
But the problem is I don't test it enough. So I don't keep up with the experience so that the training's applicable.
See, that's what I think it is. Maybe it's not just the training, Derry, but is it how we apply it? Do we need to apply it differently? Does it need to just show up in their day every day? Experiential learning. I like it.
We must be on the same wavelength, Kay, because what I was thinking about too is consequences. So it's not just, to say in another word, it's not just about it's experiencing it, but it's letting people see the consequences to their actions. Because the fat finger example you gave, there is a consequence, and that is something that could be sensitive. You don't want it in the wrong hands. Immediately got in the wrong hands because it went out to a different number you did not intend. An unauthorized user in cyber. We don't often make the people face the consequences because it gets diluted that it was an accident. Right. It is an accident, but there are consequences. So when you learn that, just like life, you start realizing that privacy has an impact.
Yeah. All the cybersecurity training we do for employees, it seems to sort of go in one ear and out the other now. We tell them it's bad, right? Well, yeah, don't do this, don't do that, right? It's going to be bad, it's going to be bad. But they've heard it so many times now, they just don't hear it any longer, right? And Tafik Alishar, one of our colleagues, did some research for the past couple of years, actually showing that privacy training can really enhance your cybersecurity training. And I think it's exactly that kind of experiential thing, right? Because if they understand the privacy harms, not just to the organization, but to themselves, right? Then they actually can internalize that. Holy shit, excuse my language, right? This actually can be bad for that reason, right? Now I understand why I have to protect the data security issues, because otherwise it's a privacy problem, right? There's all these privacy harms if I don't protect the data.
Yeah, and I've been an educator for longer than I like to admit, a long time, right? So I've taught at university level, everything, postgraduate, yada yada, and it's very important from a training perspective, You shouldn't say, don't think about a pink elephant, because all they think about is pink elephant after you said it, right? So instead of telling people what they shouldn't do, tell them what they should do. And so that will resonate better with them, and then give them a reason why they should do that. And that's better than saying don't do that, right? Because, basically any statement with don't or can't, you might as well just cross that out. Because all they heard was what they should. Oh, purple elephant, pink elephant, you know. So
Yeah.
talk about what you want them to do as opposed to what you don't want them to do.
I think the one big hurdle though is when we talk about what we should do, we still make it way too big. Like I want to go back to what Kay said about application, because we make it this big data asset, data inventory. But if you, I feel like that word is still in that point where everyone just goes, okay, I'm going to ignore it and pretend no one said that data inventory, because no one's giving me like, okay, know where your W-2s are. Do they get transferred anywhere? Right? Like getting to the specific application, because I think saying what you should do right now is still very, like, we still kind of make it a big balloon instead of making it applicable.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think that I agree with you. And I tell people, and I hate when organizations say this, like they do this with privacy and cyber. They're like, cyber and privacy, that's everyone's responsibility. I'm like, well, if you say it's everyone's responsibility, it's actually no one's.
Yeah.
Right? Because you haven't really detailed what you want the person to do, and that's what they want to know.
One example that has been very effective in my past. It's okay, you can go ahead. It's okay.
As the person who's broken things, no, I do not want that. You don't spend this much time in technology and not break some things, I tell you that.
There'd be way too many executives in the limelight.
Yeah.
True.
LaShawn?
Yeah, I'll jump in now. I think it helps to be very contextual about these things. So at Netflix, when we went with training, we didn't have a training budget per se. We had a development budget. So if somebody did something stupid while working for the company and it didn't lead to an incident, which at least to my recollection didn't happen, we nonetheless made it a teachable moment. So as an example, let's assume you were targeted for spear phishing by the testing that we were doing internally within the company. If somebody clicked on that link, they were taken to a page that said, if this had been a real phishing attempt, here's what would have happened. This data would have been lost. These APIs would have been compromised. And if the person clicking on it had admin privileges, we would have said, you could have enabled somebody on the outside to come into the company, expand their credentials, and at that point, Active Directory is gone, and so is the company's data. So being able to catch somebody in the moment and tell the story is pretty critical. And you do it not in a very name and shame kind of way, but you target that person individually. And then you send a weekly report saying that we did this test, here's how we did. It's very normal for people to think it's going to happen to somebody else down the street. It's not going to happen to us. We're good people. We know our data. We trust each other. I'm sure all of us are perfect. We never make mistakes except for me. But I think letting people know that this happens within the family is pretty critical, because that's when people are going to be like, okay, if my colleague in XYZ team did it, maybe I could do it too. So I think what we need is, rather than waiting for the one perfect law or the one perfect tool, let's use as much contextual training as possible, because that's the only way the culture is going to change. This is not about behavior on its own. It's not just about data on its own. It's about culture. It's about how we think about each other, how we work with each other. And that's going to have to change little by little, but every single day. I just like to give examples because it's helpful to know what worked and what didn't.
Yeah, that's great. So we've been on this topic for a while. Let's move on to the next one. Talking about AI. I mean, obviously it's the top of everyone's list. How do you think, for this panel, how do you guys think we can establish effective frameworks for generative AI to balance innovation and ethical considerations?
I think Pink Floyd said it best. How can you have any pudding if you don't eat your meat? Right. So the meat is governance. The meat is training. The meat is understanding your data lineage, data provenance, right? And companies really want to get into AI and generative AI, which is the pudding, but you really can't do that if you haven't done that work first, right? So I think, eat your vegetables, eat your meat, do those things that maybe weren't a huge high priority. I work with a lot of companies that are actively in the process of either looking at it, implementing, doing this, and the ones that get farther faster are the ones who've done that work. ahead of time, right? So there are a lot of companies that are excited about it, probably can't even do it, can't even take advantage of the opportunity because they haven't done that other deep work that they need to do. So I think, you know, fund those governance, programs. Look at your data lineage. Look at the provenance of data. Understand why you need it. It may not be, maybe you can't use it. Maybe it doesn't work for you. Maybe you need another AI something. So you have to really, instead of getting excited about it and thinking, well, okay, we want to do this and trying to like shoehorn it into an organization, figure out if this technology is something that you can use and utilize in a way that can make your company better in some way.
I think I would say the reason Gen AI is so promising is because it brings together so many small movements, lots of data, lots of connectivity, fast internet, global IDs, quantum computing, and now you can actually cut back on the number of API calls because Gen AI does so much of the work for you, which means the underlying assumptions of the basic model are entrenched that much farther, right? So the question is, how do you make sure that you can monetize Gen AI as much as possible? Because that's what we get so excited, right? People think it's going to make a lot of money, a lot of good features. But how do you make sure that the assumptions are tested? How do you make sure that the data is watched for bias? Because what happens is purely privacy and security have a contained perimeter. At some point, you can contain the damage. If it's a company, you can lock things down and delete stuff in mass. But with Gen AI, you can't contain it because the models are inspiring other models. So I feel like making sure that the models and the data are consistently being assessed is pretty critical. And I'm not sure people understand the risk there.
Sean, I love everything you said. I want to go back and capture what Nishant said. That was just such a profound kind of focus on AI. But I just want to also point out it is an opportunity, although I agree with Debbie's point, like don't just rush in and try to find this shiny object AI and apply it in some random way that doesn't have an ROI at all, that makes sense. I think it's an opportunity to go back to all the things that Nishant mentioned and assess their risk, and almost all the things that everyone glossed over, like not important, ignoring, you're crying wolf, this isn't going to affect me. AI is that opportunity to say, I think it's an awesome opportunity to say, it's already implemented. This isn't new, right? We've had chatbots, we've had Siri, we've had Tesla, we've had all of these applications of different forms of AI. You're just seeing it now because it's generative AI and it's a new form that is applicable to you. But it gives us this opportunity, especially on the insurance side. For me, I tell brokers all the time, like, this is that opportunity to show how wide the connected risk is. So Nishant, everything you said, but from a risk perspective, makes people realize that when they hold a computer and they add a person, they're adding not just a endpoint, but they're adding a connection. They're adding all of these other layers that I don't think, and I think the risk where we are in cyber insurance is that we have not yet understood the risk that we accept with the digital transformation of this world.
Someone on this call earlier, it may have been you, Debbie, I think said something very, very poignant, which was we have to start with with like the outcomes, or like the what, right? So when I hear a lot of the sentences that begin with generative AI blank, 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 like my first thought is generative what though? Like, are we talking about like just like large language models? Like, what are we talking about? Are we talking about like image generation? Generative AI is exactly that. It is a large, broad category. And Nishant highlighted the other end of the spectrum for me, which is where I still feel lost from a privacy standpoint. Like from a technology standpoint, I'm always like, sure, but what are we talking about generating here? Because like, I don't know how much regulation needs to go in any of those things, if any. And then the other side of that is the technologist to me that says, okay, but are we not working with the garbage in, garbage out problem? Nishant, you said it too, right? Like a lot of these models are being built and predicated upon yet previous in other models. And somewhere all the way down the line, there's a set of all the way up and down the line for that matter, there is data being used to train these models. And I'm still trying to figure out if the problem is on the way in, on the way out, in between, if it's the whole darn thing, and which exactly what part of the generativeness are we most worried about? Is it that it is creating pseudo derivative works? Is it that it's just creating works in general? Now, most of the internet is filled with nonsense, which arguably it always was. It's just now generated this nonsense. Like, it might be a step up of the drivel that used to be there, in my opinion. But I like machines.
I like to take garbage in, junkyard out. That's what I tell people. So
junkyard out.
Yeah. So it's a lot of junk that comes out on the other end. But the problem is all the way through the process. All the way is from the provenance of the data, all the way through the lineage to end of life of the data, right? And so that problem, governance really needs to be there. And so companies have not traditionally really tracked data in that way, thought about it in that way. Really good companies have done that, but I think generative AI adds more of a risk because it becomes harder to do that tracking because companies hadn't traditionally been able to do that. So to answer your question, that risk is not just in the collection, even though the collection does have a huge part of it, is also in what happens to that data after it's collected and what it's used for. So the threat and the risks happen throughout the whole data life cycle. So I think people think, okay, well, I have provenance, I have legal right to have the data. You scramble the eggs within the LLM model and then you use it for something bad and then bam, like you messed up. So you can't really think about it only in terms of the data that goes in. It's also what happens with the data and how you're using it. From your perspective, what you said, Gabe, around like regulation, right? So let's say you're just creating like an outline of some, basic thing. Like, no regulator cares about that. You do that all day long, right? People were talking a lot about IP lawsuits and things like that, and people's original work and scrambled and LLMs. That's a whole different thing. But I feel like that conversation is going to change a lot, especially as more companies are implementing their own LLMs. Newsflash, ChatGPT is not the only LLM there is, right? So there are a lot of different ways that companies can use these technologies, but then they're fragile and they need people who understand data and understand data systems and know how to not only use them, but maintain them, right? So it has to be, we need more people, not less. So we need more people who understand data systems, understand data lineage to be able to really gain the full benefit of these technologies.
I would say people should not wait for the big governance plan to come together. I think what happens is people don't understand that small opportunities is how security began, how privacy began. So I would rather follow the data having started small, because the bigger risk with Gen AI is people are going to think of Gen AI as this huge, big thing, huge, big cash cow and huge, big risk. And therefore, they're going to wait for the perfect solution to come forward. I think it's going to come down to some combination of internal tools, training, and third-party solutions. And the target is going to be shifting as well. Like, it's not like the data and the models remain static, right? So making sure that your solutions are consistently evolving is going to be the way to go. Because waiting for the right governance model to come, hopefully it will come when my book comes out. But until that happens, the sense is, my recommendation is to make sure that people try things and see what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, that's a really great way to think about it, in my opinion, Nishant. I think when I think about generative AI, I think opportunity. There's risk, but there's a hell of a lot of opportunity. I mean, you probably wouldn't think that would be the opinion of a privacy guy, but I think that there's a lot of people out there that have very extreme opinions on, generative AI only generates bad answers and trash, and it's just stealing everybody's copyrighted work. And to some extent, some of those opinions are valid, but a lot of those things can be fixed. They're true of certain models. They're not necessarily true of the broad sense of what can be for the technology. Guardrails and other things. New technologies can fix a lot of those issues. So if you're looking at this as a company, you can think of it sort of in two ways. Should I, be utilizing the technology? Should I be implementing the technology? And, sort of building on the technology. And I think you can think about both of those things positively. You just have to be careful about what kinds of personal information or trade secrets you put into them, because they do seem to be leaking a lot of that information still. So, with those caveats, I'd say go out there and find out, because there's a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, I don't teach AI abstinence, so I don't believe in that. So can't stop people from using AI. You need to educate them about what it is and what it can do. I always think about someone trying to put a nail in the wall with a wrench. Right, it's not the right tool. So figure out if it's the right tool for what the hell it is you're trying to do in the first place, and test it out, play with it. See, I see companies creating labs where they want people to actually figure out how to use it, how they can leverage it. So it's not going to go away. I don't know why people say that. I remember people thought computing was going to go away, right? So these were folks who were very paper bound, and they thought computer was like the next fad. And I remember people didn't want to, the higher ups didn't want computers in their office because that was for like the minions and stuff like that, right? And we knew how that turned out. So let's not be silly about AI. Know that it's here, it's not going away. You need to learn it. I think it's going to have a horizontal effect on almost any type of job. So being able to educate yourself is the best way forward.
I think TikTok is the new computer for our new age. Because we're like, oh, what is this?
It's similar vein. Have you guys heard? I have a couple of interns in Gen Z, in Gen Alpha kind of area. Have you heard they stopped teaching typing in schools now? Like a lot of schools don't teach typing because there's so much voice to text options.
It's wild.
Isn't that crazy? I love your oil.
Yeah.
My brain blew up.
And yet somehow they're still teaching
We
like
need
cursive.
they're still teaching cursive but not typing. Like, are they intentionally trying to make the next generation dumber? Because they're making the next generation dumber.
I think so.
The struggle is real.
I love your example of like the problem still existing, right? And we're just figuring out new ways to solve the problems with the phone. And the best example I know, because you think about that impact, I love, and I'm sure it was on TikTok, but there's the example of, the intern was told to get 50 sheets of copier paper. And when they bring it back warm, you go, what? Why is it warm? And it's warm because they smartly thought, instead of counting 50 sheets, I'm going to set the printer to print out 50 sheets. But there's other implications, right? It may have been 2 seconds faster, but how much more energy did it take, right? The push and pull is just so interesting. I love that example because to me it says they've got something in there. Like they've got some ideas. We just have to figure out how to attach those ideas to the experience that we have on the privacy side. And I do think that there is room for, and I've been searching, if anyone knows, we need a Gen Z view on privacy, because I think it's also adjusting, instead of financial numbers and social security numbers and all that, I think it's adjusting to more of an authenticity of accounts, social media impact. Like they're more worried about unauthorized access than numbers in the statutes.
I'm happy to hear that.
And I would say the real risk and
given up
opportunity
hope.
is to really make sure.
I still haven't found my poster child yet. So if anyone knows a Gen Z privacy nut, like bring it. I want to meet one. I need to meet that person at IPP that is below the age of, I think it's born before 95, that loves privacy. Tell me to find him.
No, I think Nishant was going to say something.
Nishant?
Yeah, I think I've forgotten the point I got talked over a couple of times. I would basically say the real challenge and opportunity here is the big companies that have cut their teeth with privacy and security harms are probably better prepared because they know what to look for. My worry about the Gen AI risk is the application has taken off in a very big way, which means the regulation and the enforcement will come in one push in a significant way. And the concern is that the next unicorn is going to get stuck up with it. So I think companies that are not big growth companies right now, but want to be growth companies, they're the ones whose lessons will teach the rest of us what Gen AI is going to become. So I kind of feel like I would not want the next startup to feel that, oh, we're okay because the big guys are going to get it. Yes, the big companies will be the targets of Gen AI enforcement, but they have the muscle memory, the history to help them respond faster. I would say this, the next generation of growth companies needs to be very, very careful on how often they check their work, so to speak.
Good point. We are at the close to the top of the hour. I don't know if you guys have a hard stop.
I do, unfortunately.
As do I,
Well,
unfortunately. But this
well,
has been great. It's so good to see all the faces, and this has been, for me, even a very insightful conversation. So I appreciate every last one of you for being here. And you too, Violet. My apologies for having skipped over you at the start.
Yes, thank you everyone for
Thank
coming.
you.
Thank you for attending, everyone watching. Love you guys. Thank you for what you do. And hopefully we can try to do this again.
We'll see you all soon. Privacy.
Take care.
Bye.